The Daniel Boone National Forest is one of Kentucky's great natural wonders. Located in the eastern half of the state across a wide swath of eastern Kentucky counties, the Daniel Boone National Forest includes a little bit of something for everyone. Not to mention the world-famous Red River Gorge geological area. But where did the Daniel Boone National Forest get its name? Now hang on, before you say the obvious answer, I want to tell you an amazing backstory on how the Daniel Boone National Forest is actually named after this guy. Hello! We got a lot to talk about today, so let's get started. Now, if you come to Kentucky's Daniel Boone National Forest, you're gonna see rock climbers, hikers, kayakers, maybe a couple of bears, and certainly a couple of copperheads. But you know what else you're gonna see? Trees. A lot of trees, so many trees. In fact, the trees are where we're gonna begin our story. Kentucky's history is partly bound up in the value and prevalence of its hardwood forests. Before the Civil War, small-scale lumber mills existed across the state, but after the Civil War, large-scale timber companies came in and really bumped up production. In fact, by 1870, Kentucky ranked 15th in the nation for lumber production, and that year they pulled 214 million board feet out of the state's forests. Imagine how much that lumber would be worth today. Now, the entire state of Kentucky was of interest to the timber industry. In fact, let's not forget, Frankfort has a very rich history of being a sawmill town. But it was really the eastern portion of the state that held a lot of value if the trees could be extracted. The area that would eventually become the Daniel Boone National Forest had a really natural advantage, and that was the river there. In fact, the trees could be felled and then sent down the river to places like Clay City, Betaville, and more, where they could be milled and they could be then sent by train to places like Lexington and Cincinnati. Now, what would become the Daniel Boone National Forest also had a very rich history in timber, as I mentioned. In fact, in 1880, the Red River Lumber Mill was established, and this would have extracted trees directly in what would be today's Daniel Boone National Forest and the Kentucky Red River Gorge. In a matter of a decade, this lumber mill goes from a small ragtag operation in the middle of eastern Kentucky to being one of the leading lumber producers in the nation. And get this, for those who are familiar with Kentucky's Red River Gorge history, one of its iconic places, Nada Tunnel, is actually created and named by a timber company. In fact, it was completed in 1912, and it was named by the Dana Lumber Company, who called it Nada. Dana, Nada, do you see it? You see it. Now, the timber industry was not without its issues in the Daniel Boone National Forest area. First off, this was a region already prone to flooding. Cutting down all those trees created erosion, which made the flash flooding even less predictable. There was also a cultural tradition of burning off these areas to keep them clear after timbering. And in fact, in the mid-1860s, Kentucky was a top 10 state for having burned over 500,000 acres across the Commonwealth. Thinking about the longevity of this forest was a serious concern. And in fact, this was something that the nation was also beginning to think about, as it considered establishing for the first time a forest service to take care of the trees. President at the time, Theodore Roosevelt, had a strong interest in conservation, and the idea of a national forest was partly born in, interestingly enough, the Boone and Crockett Club, which he founded in 1887. Soon after, Congress would support the creation of a group to manage these forests. This included the creation of a Division of Forestry, an 1891 Forest Reserve Act, which authorized holding reserves aside to be managed by the Department of Interior, and then the moving of these reserves over to a newly minted Bureau of Forestry, which in a few years would simply be called the U.S. Forest Service. Now, by the time the U.S. Forest Service is created, we already see a growing localized interest in protecting the national forests in Kentucky. And we also see some national level things happening as well. For example, we see the 1911 Weeks Act, which looks at buying properties in southern Appalachia near the headwaters there. Likewise, by 1914, the Forest Service already had a report in hand looking at forests around the headwaters of the Kentucky River and the Cumberland River, both in eastern Kentucky. However, it really wouldn't be until the 1930s until things really started moving towards a national forest, which means we're getting closer to this guy. Hello! Now, by the 1930s, the Forest Service was already discussing something they called the Cumberland Purchase Unit. It covered 12 counties in eastern Kentucky, roughly north of the Red River Gorge, all the way south to the Tennessee state line. Covered over 500,000 acres, and they were offering $6 an acre at the time. There were conversations about including other places, such as the Cumberland and Kentucky headwaters, as well as expanding in different directions, but these didn't catch on. In fact, they really stuck with these 12 counties of interest. Now, the Cumberland Purchase area already had public sentiment behind it, as well as the support of the National Forest. 1936, Kentucky's Governor Albert Chandler also adds the Commonwealth's blessing for the Kentucky land to be included in this new national forest, which will help celebrate Kentucky's great rich history as well as its forests. And who gets to sign that paperwork? Yeah, that's right, Franklin Roosevelt, fifth cousin of Theodore Roosevelt, who got all this started with the Boone and Crockett Club all those years ago in 1887. And so naturally, they named it after a very important figure in Kentucky's history. That's right, they called this national forest the Cumberland National Forest. Is that a typo? They called it the Cumberland National Forest? You're kidding me. Why didn't they call it the Daniel... Oh. That's right. They didn't call it the Daniel Boone National Forest. They called it the Cumberland National Forest. They kept the name Cumberland from the purchase unit. And from the Forest Service's perspective, this was very much a Kentucky history name. You know, it was named after the Cumberland Gap, the Cumberland Mountains, the Cumberland River. And all of those were named by an early Kentucky explorer, Dr. Thomas Walker. Hello! Ah, you thought I was going to show that other guy, right? Hello! Now, we're coming back to him in just a moment. Dr. Thomas Walker studied medicine, but he also speculated in land. He worked for the Loyal Land Company, and he led their first expedition into the western colony of Virginia, now modern-day Kentucky. This included traveling through, in 1750, what he would rename the Cumberland Gap. But why Cumberland? Why did Thomas Walker name it the Cumberland Gap? Well, there's a long history of British Empire folks naming stuff after British Empire stuff, and that's exactly what happened here. Everyone, may I please have the honor of introducing you to Prince William, Duke of Cumberland. Hello! Prince William's probably best known for his work in the Stuart or Jacobite uprising starting in 1745. This was an effort by the Stuarts to take over the English crown, which they felt was rightfully theirs. Now, Prince William fights at the Battle of Culloden against the lead person from the Stuarts. That would be Prince Charles Edward Stuart, or Bonne Prince Charlie to us friends. And he offers no quarter to the Stuarts, which he massacres on the battlefield. Now, depending on which end of the genealogical tree you fall on, this is why William is called Sweet William by some and the Butcher Cumberland by others. Butcher Cumberland. Wow, that's a nickname you'll want. So it didn't take too long for people to begin questioning why the Forest Service had called this the Cumberland National Forest. In fact, even in the 1930s, people were like, hey, y'all, haven't you heard of Daniel Boone? He's kind of important to Kentucky's history. Daniel Boone was born November 2nd, 1734. He was a frontiersperson and a folk hero for our region. He served in the American Revolution. He founded Boonesboro, which was one of Kentucky's earliest English-speaking settlements in the region. And he also served in the Virginia General Assembly. While traveling through what would become Kentucky in 1769, he stood atop Pilot Knob, and he would see in the far distance a forest that would one day bear his name. He would also venture over to the Cumberland Gap while working for the Transylvania Company, and there he would help create the wilderness road that would become so important in bringing people into the region. Now, despite Daniel Boone's ties to Kentucky history, the Forest Service stood their ground. They didn't want to rename the Cumberland National Forest. However, a couple of pieces fell into play in the 1960s that really created a lot of support for this idea. First one is 1964, Daniel Boone gets his own national TV series. Now, even though this TV series played a little fast and loose with how they depicted Daniel Boone, right up to that coonskin cap, which he never would have worn, it really raised Daniel Boone as a national figure. This also led Governor Breathitt in 1965 to put his support behind that idea. And later, Kentucky's Commonwealth would also state that Daniel Boone was far more marketable for the National Forest than the Butcher Cumberland. Imagine that. So it leads us to this magical moment. April 11th, 1966, Lyndon B. Johnson signs the paperwork that renames the Cumberland National Forest to, wait for it, the Daniel Boone National Forest. Yay! And so, folks, that's how the Daniel Boone National Forest was named after this guy before it was named after this guy. Thanks for watching this video. Did you like it? If so, subscribe to this channel and please share this video with other people on social media. Also, if there's a Kentucky history story that you'd like me to do a video on, leave it in the comments below. Look for more videos soon, y'all. Take care.